Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. We've been talking a lot on this podcast about where we've been, about who we are, and about who we want to be as men. Each of our own relationships to and journeys with masculinity are important, but I'm feeling like there is more for us to explore and action on as we live in the values of the new masculine. It is incumbent upon us to widen the aperture even further so that we become conscious of what we are teaching and modeling to boys as they are becoming men. My next guest, Jonathan Cristall, is here to talk about this very topic. Jonathan is a prosecutor and certified sexual violence prevention instructor who works extensively with teenagers, their families, and schools to teach physical, digital, emotional, and legal life skills. His new book, What They Don't Teach Teens, Life Safety Skills for Teens and the Adults Who Care About Them, is a guidebook for the complexities of being a teenager in the 21st century. Jonathan describes himself as a father, as a leader, and as a husband. His entire life, from his own challenges as a teen to his wealth of professional experience, has given him insights into what is expected of young people and the ways we don't adequately prepare them for the world. It is, in fact, his role as father of 3 sons that inspired him to write this book. So, time for Jonathan to share some of his insights with us on the new masculine. Welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thanks a lot for having me, Travis.
So you've got a lot of professional experience, but I also know that you have some personal experiences of what it's like to be a troubled teen.
Yes, I do.
Tell me a little bit about your story. Tell me why this book was so important for you to write.
Well, growing up in Los Angeles, as you indicated, I struggled a heck of a lot. I was a good kid who got pivoted off path. I had a difficult family situation. I just was kind of left to my own devices and made many mistakes along the way. I was very fortunate that I was able to get my life together and go on to become a lawyer and a prosecutor for the city of Los Angeles. And thankfully, met my wife, Lisa, and we were married 20 years ago and have 3 sons. All 3 are teenagers. And, about 5.5 years ago, it was starting to bother me. All the tests at school, the boys were under pressure to study and to do homework about, math, history, science. And it got under my skin, all the pressure and stress. But yet there's no class, at least in the schools that my boys go to, on understanding what sexual consent is, their rights with the police, what acts can amount to sexual harassment, their digital footprint, sextortion, underage sexting consequences, and so on and so forth. And so I said to my wife, I said, there has to be a book out there that will teach us as parents and teachers and caregivers about something more than what, they're getting taught in school. So I went, she said, well, go find it. Couldn't find it. And I looked everywhere. And then I reported back where I said, well, there's no book. And my wife, Lisa, said, then you should write it. And, she went over my qualifications, teaching sexual violence prevention, the troubled teen, the prosecutor, the father. And so I said yes, somewhat reluctantly. And it was a 5-year journey of writing and researching and interviewing. And, I've had a a lot of challenges in my life. And this was by far the hardest challenge I've ever faced to get it done. And I'm very proud of how it came out.
Oh, I think you should be. I am absolutely in awe of people who sit down to actually go through the process of writing a book. It seems excruciating at times because you write it, you edit it, you have to change it. It goes through so many different iterations. And as you say, it's a 5-year journey. It's not like just sitting down and writing a high school 5-page paper and then being done with it.
Yeah.
That's a big undertaking.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So, I worked 7 days a week, maybe with 1 or 2 days off here and there, but I really worked 7 days a week for 5 years. And so sometimes before I'd go into the office, I'd wake up in the morning early and get some work done. Once the boys went to sleep, try to get work done Saturdays, Sundays. I mean, it was a task. And I just kept putting, one foot in front of the other, not thinking about how long it was taking me, just getting something done every day. That was my goal every day. Get one thing done today. And it took a lot of time, but, it got done.
Well, thank goodness for a really supportive partner that encouraged you on that journey.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that dedication, but the book, of course, is dedicated to my wife, Lisa, who's a co-author on this and then some, and really, picked up the slack at times so I could jump down and into the garage, start working, and was my first line editor, my first proofreader. She's an English major from Cal, so she was immensely helpful in every single way.
Oh, God bless her and her skills. It's lovely that your skills are so complementary to each other for this book. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your own personal journey that sort of inspired you. What are some of the stories that you learned as a boy growing up into a man about what it means to be a man? And what were the sort of like lessons that were taught to you throughout?
Well, I love that, when we spoke, before the podcast and you were asking me about some of my memories and what it meant to be a masculine or to grow up and be a man and so on and so forth. And I was reflecting just on my early childhood memories, not necessarily related to that, but just my earliest childhood memories. And one that I thought of just instantly, and I'd forgotten about it. And I don't want to say it was traumatic, but I remember it. And I don't remember a lot from my childhood. And so basically, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I was growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Moved to LA. And my mom had like a cable TV show. Okay. I don't remember what it was about. She would bring people into the show and she'd interview them. She was doing like a holiday toy special, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever toy special. And they had 100 toys in this room, and I was going to be on the show. And so they told me before, go in and choose any toy that's your favorite, and then we're going to interview you about the toy. So I went in, I looked at every single toy, and I chose Kissing Barbie. That was the toy I loved. That was the toy I wanted to be interviewed about. You put some lipstick on the Barbie, I don't remember. Then you put her up to your face and she left a little lipstick mark. Well, the producer, no. He would not let me be interviewed about that toy. He said, no, that's a toy for girls. And I remember how I felt. I felt perplexed. I was confused. I just couldn't process why it's a toy. I'm a kid. Why does it matter what's for a girl and for a boy? And so that's really my first childhood memory of having to conform and having to, be a man and grow up to be a man, which means you can't like girls' toys because, you're not strong then, or you're weak, or whatever, whatever the narrative, at least in that producer's eyes were. So that was really my first glimpse into that. And, growing up, really, I don't remember a lot of other things from when I was young, but I remember when I was in LA, I'm 11, 12 years old. And, as like guys, we never hugged. And, I hug all my friends, guys, girls, whatever, we hug. And not just the bro hug with the pat on the back. No, we hug. If you hug, when I was a kid, if you hugged, you were gay. And there was nothing else to it. And what's so frightening when I think back on that is it's not like I ever thought there could be something else. Or maybe they care for each other and they're just good friends. And I don't want to say all of us thought like that, but a lot of us thought like that. And certainly, I can't cry. I can't show weakness. I can't wear, any colors that would indicate, quote, I might be gay. That's what we were afraid of, or not necessarily afraid of, but we were afraid of being judged. And I look back and it's frightening to me. How could I be so ignorant? How could I be so foolish? How could none of my circle of friends have ever said, guys, you're way off on this? And flash, forward to today where I look, there's still all sorts of, issues that many we're going to talk about with respect to masculinity and what it means to be a man. But I, just look at my own sons and they struggle. Look, kids struggle with all sorts of things, but they certainly know that men hug and aren't necessarily gay or probably not gay. They hug for all sorts of reasons. One of my sons loves to wear pants. He doesn't care what people think. I mean, it's progressed so much, and I'm really proud of that. And I'm kind of scared to think about how I was all those years ago. I'm 49, so that gives you a time.
It's amazing to think about, looking back on that, how much it felt like was at risk by just wearing a pink t-shirt or a purple t-shirt. There was no way I was going to be wearing pink or purple. It felt like everything was at risk at that point. And I am gay. And so having to think about, I'm going to be perceived this way. And I'm also already knowing this about myself and afraid. It was like double the fear on me in that situation.
Yeah. I could only imagine. And the thing is, we were friends with people who were gay. We didn't care, like, if so-and-so was gay, nice guy, but I don't want to be perceived that way. It makes no sense. Which is why it's so upsetting. And when I reflect, these years later, well, I can just tell you consciously, my wife and I, but particularly as a man, I've done what I can and I'm still doing so that my boys don't, grow up with certain stereotypes in their mind, and certain preconceived ideas based on what they see or read or hear, that the narrative is just so often false, and hurtful to them.
Yeah, it makes me think of you, as you were talking about the physical affection piece between men and how men don't hug. There's that picture that's going around, it being election season, and there's that picture going around of Joe Biden hugging and kissing his son on his cheek, and the uproar that came about how disgusting that is, that a father is kissing his son on his adult son on the cheek. It's amazing to me that we're still having that conversation about what's not allowed in this shared love between men, a father and a son even. Like, we're still having that conversation about how inappropriate that is. That's so strange to me.
It's strange. It's astonishing. It's upsetting. And ignorant. And it's just, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around that all these years later. Some of us have evolved, some of us still have evolving to do, but yet some are still, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever, thinking that, things are different than actually how they are today.
Yeah, totally. So you've shared with me that, and you talk about it in the book, you talk about some of your own like teenage challenging experiences that are a big part of why you write this book, especially around police interactions and interactions with the law. Also why you became a prosecutor in your career. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure. Well, a couple of things stand out. Essentially, as you indicated, Travis, my personal stories are weaved through every chapter. So every chapter in the book, I have some connection to personally, professionally. And when it comes to, let's say, police interactions, I had many police interactions when I was in high school. I was arrested when I was 16 for a nonviolent offense. And one of the stories I relay was that, essentially, not only did I not know the rules of engagement, I didn't know what my rights were. Did I have to answer questions? Could I refuse a search? Which made me scared. But, on the night of my arrest, I didn't comply with orders. And instead of putting my hands up, I was in my car. I put my hands below my seat. And I later found out, that the police who had their guns trained on me, had considered shooting. had considered firing him, and I heard that after the fact, which terrified me. I relay that story to emphasize that interfacing with the police is no joke, even when you've done nothing wrong, but also to emphasize what's going on not just today, but what's been going on for many, many years, is racial injustice. And many people, particularly, people of color, had they been in my situation, would the police have fired? Yeah, they very well might have. So, I really emphasize in the two police chapters, one on, what to do and not to do when you're pulled over in a car or on foot, and the other about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights we all have, is that, look, interfacing with the police, is no joke. It's serious business for you. It's serious business for them. And we all have to be mindful of what our rights are and how we're coming across and our actions. But certainly, we see racial injustice. We see police brutality against the disabled, against people of color, and young people, again, particularly of color. They know a lot of the stuff that's already in this book related to police interactions. I like to think I've added a fair amount to that, but because their parents or grandparents or caregivers were so afraid of them interacting with the police that they taught this to them at a young age. And so any way you shape it, it's really important for young people to know what to do and what not to do when they interface with the police.
Yeah, I love how you're talking about this sort of like in different communities because of the disproportionate ways they're impacted by interactions with the police and the safety within it. There has been an essential like survival skill about knowing how to interact in those moments that some young teenagers are taught and some are not taught. And I'm so grateful that you're bringing this topic up because I think it's one of the things I was most fascinated about when we got connected to do this interview was to sort of pick your brain around this balance that you strike in your career around being a prosecutor who's in charge of prosecuting crimes, but also educating teens and the adults who care about them about their interactions with the police so that they can be informed in the way that they interact with the police. That I know you talk about it a little bit in the book, but I'm really curious about that tension point between being a prosecutor but also being somebody that's very aware of the disproportionate ways that people of color are impacted by our legal system.
Oh, for sure. There is tension. And let me tell you a quick little story. So when I wrote the two chapters on police interactions, and I had them polished and they were pretty well advanced, like you said, I am a prosecutor. I work with the police every day I'm on the job, and I have close relationships with police officers, and I'm very supportive of the police. And it's my belief that, I call for criminal justice reform in the book. I talk about the importance of that. I talk about racial injustice, police brutality. They're not mutually exclusive. I believe I can be supportive of the police and still, policing as a nation has to be changed. We need to improve it. I don't think those contradict each other. So I drafted the two chapters on the police. And I know I gave it to a friend to read and he goes, man, you're telling all the tricks of the trade here. I go, well, these are people's rights. They have every right to know what they're allowed to do and what not to do. But man, the cops are going to be mad at you. I said, well, this is what I've taught my own son. I'm publishing these chapters. But out of an abundance of caution, I gave it to some police officers I'm friends with too. I said, listen, please read these two chapters. Be very honest with me. Are you mad? Are you pissed off at me that I'm giving away, the tricks of the trade? I'm telling people, what you might say to get them to admit something leading to their arrest, or how you get people to consent when they don't want to consent. And they all said the exact same thing. The ones that had kids, every single one said, Jonathan, after they read the chapters, what do you think I taught my own son? What do you think I taught my own daughter? And that blew me away. I was not expecting it. And if a prosecutor is teaching his son about what their rights are and what to do and what not to do, and police officers are teaching their children, other people may want to have this information as well. It's valuable information. And I'll just segue into a quick other little story. About 6 months ago, I'm driving with one of my sons. I don't want to identify which son by giving the age, but I'm driving with one of my sons, and I know out of my three sons, he doesn't care for the police, at least at this age. He sees, and I get it, as a young person, he hasn't had a number of interactions with the police. So he sees what's happening, particularly with black men on TV, where they're being shot for doing nothing. The police brutality. And that's what he sees, and he's angry about it. And I understand that. We're all angry about it, or at least many of us are angry about it. So we're driving together, and I've talked with him about these issues, and I get pulled over. So the blue and red lights shine. I get pulled over, roll down my window a little bit. I put my hands on my steering wheel so the officer knows I'm not a threat. And as the officer approaches my window, before he can say anything, before I can say anything, my son starts yelling at him. How dare he pull me over? What is he doing? Blah, blah. My dad's a prosecutor. Just about to die. I seriously, I was just couldn't believe he said he was going off. And so at the exact same time, the officer and I said, you stop it. You be quiet. This is none of your business. And what I said to him afterward, and I talk about this in the book, I said, look, at this point in your life, you may not respect the police. I think you should respect the police, but I can't tell you how to feel. But no matter how you feel about the police, it is infinitely in your best interest to treat them with respect. Now, should you be able to mouth off to a cop and not be, physically hurt? Of course you should, right? The police don't have the right to do that to you based on your words. But you get the wrong officer at the wrong time, you may get hurt or worse. And so look, my goal as your dad is for you to come home safely, just like it is for everything, just like it is for every caregiver. And you will have a better chance of doing that if you treat the police with respect. So for no other reason, just do it because it's in your best interest.
Yeah, it reminds me of another part of your book where you're talking about sort of physical safety, being out there in the public, especially at night. And you're like, there's a point where you like stress, like, you're probably not going to win against a gun. So don't argue in that way. Your safety needs to be your priority, not being correct or right or the most dominant in power. And I think that's such an interesting thing that we've been talking about in previous episodes of this podcast is this desire within masculinity to overpower or to be the most powerful thing in the room, and how that can get us into so much trouble and be so harmful to ourselves and to others when we're engaging in that sort of power over dynamic with each other.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, I do a lot of in-person teaching about the concepts in the book throughout Los Angeles and, the last 9 months or so via Zoom. And when I do the events in person and I teach on street safety, I always ask the same question to the group of young people. How many of you would give chase to someone if you're walking around with your iPhone, they snatch it and start running? How many of you would, be upset, but not chase after? And how many of you would go after the thief? And I'd say about half of the hands in the group go up. About half of the young people would go chase after the robber. And I'd say about 70% or 80% of the hands in the room are the boys, are the young men. And, I've never really broken it down and tried to, overanalyze it. But yeah, I think it falls in line with what you're saying. How can I be strong? How can I be a man if some guy's just going to come take my phone and I don't do anything about it? Like, what's that say about me? Am I a punk? Am I weak? And what I say in the book, and of course in person, is, your job is to just make it home safe. You can get a new iPhone, right? Your purse, your wallet, your money, it can all be replaced. Yeah, it's going to suck. It's upsetting. But, you physically can't be replaced. Your health, if you get shot, it's hard to fix that, with the snap of a finger. You can't just go to the Apple store and get something, a new device. So, so the physical safety is a big part of it. And I think, the masculinity or this concept or the idea of masculinity absolutely plays a part in that. And feeling, that I'm tough. And that if I don't stand my ground, I also talk about if someone's yelling at you, just walk away. And I explain why it's important to walk away. Everyone has a gun. There's more guns than people in our country. I go into all of that. But you can see how often, if a man challenges another man, boy and boy, whatever, it can be hard for them to just turn the other cheek and walk away because people may perceive them as being weak when actually they were stronger for just being able to walk away.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly our cultural conditioning kicks in and we're like, I have to be a man in this situation, and to do anything other than to attack is emasculating. It's fascinating. And I'm so glad you're saying this because we're in such a divisive time right now where the temperature is so hot and things are escalating beyond control all over the place. And I think that it's really important, especially in our current times, to cool the situation down, to keep yourself safe, not as a way of trying to be some hero in some way, but just to keep yourself safe, to learn how to cool the situation and get the hell out of there so that you can stay safe.
That's what it's all about. It's staying safe, obviously physically, emotionally, digitally, legally. There's many different layers to the safety we're talking about, and there's a ripple effect. And in one way or another, they often intertwine. And, in the book, I have it divided into 3 sections. The first section on the police and street safety, the second section on sex violence and misconduct, the third section on digital safety, but they all intertwine. You can't really separate any of these, right? Because our lives are so intertwined, whether it's our physical lives, our digital lives, our emotional lives, they all go together, and you can't, make a decision in one and not have it have an impact directly or indirectly in the other.
And so as we kind of put a period on this sort of section of the book that's around interactions with the police and street safety, is there one major key theme that you would draw people's attention to? Absolutely, they should go and find the book to find out all of the different explanations that you go through. I think one of the cool part is that you lay out the chapters, you say what clearly they're going to get out of the chapter, and then at the end of certain chapters, there's quizzes that they can take, that the teen can take. I love that concept because it's meeting them where they're at developmentally and really asking them to think critically about what they learn, not just skimming through pages, but actually have to sort of be accountable at the end of each chapter. So there's some really fantastic things that are about this book. I'm wondering if you have one sort of key thing that you like to make sure to impart when talking to teens about their interactions with police.
I think that the most important is to just be respectful. I understand, as we were talking about before, I understand people have strong feelings about the police. But it's always in our best interest to be respectful. And then when it comes to knowing your rights, you don't have to consent to searches. You don't have to answer questions of the police. It doesn't mean you shouldn't. And I weigh out some of the options you have in these situations and, what might be at stake for you or for someone else. And so there's a lot to think about when, we consider invoking our rights. But the most important thing, is to follow the law. The police can come at your door whether you've done something wrong or not. They can stop you. We've seen it over and over, whether you've done something or not. But if you want to stay out of the crosshairs of the police, the best thing you can do, it is not a guarantee, but the best thing you can do is follow the law. It helps.
Yeah, it helps. And I'm also grateful that you're honest that it's not foolproof, because I think we've seen some really powerful representations with Breonna Taylor, with George Floyd, of places where it's not about disrespect to the police and it's not about breaking a law, and their lives were taken from them. And so I think that it's important to say, here's your best bet, and acknowledge the reality that it's not a guarantee that that's what's going to work.
Right. And remember, I started writing this book over 5 years ago, and I was talking about racial injustice when I started writing it. Now these issues have really come front and center, as they should. And when I first, the chapter 2 is called Safer Police Interactions. It was first entitled Safe Police Interactions. And I changed the title. I go, how can I call it Safe Police Interactions? There are certainly many, many situations that no matter what you do, it's not going to be safe. So that's why I call it safer. Increase your chances, increase your odds of having a safer police interaction.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you differentiate between the two, because I think it is important to really acknowledge that there are certain situations that it's not your fault that it became unsafe. We see a lot of interactions, especially around people who are peacefully protesting, where it's escalating beyond. I live in the middle of Capitol Hill neighborhood in Seattle, and 2 blocks from the occupied protest zone that happened this summer. And so got to see a lot of that firsthand, and got to see the escalation that happens even when people are following the laws and being respectful. So I appreciate that you can differentiate the two, and that you can sort of encourage safer interactions. And then there's also the unknown that can happen.
Exactly.
So section 2 of the book is all around like sexual assault, consent, sexual harassment. Share with me some of the key points that are important to you of why we need to educate young boys, but also just young people in general around these concepts.
Sure. So section 2 has consent, harassment, sexual harassment, teen dating violence, and online sexual blackmail, called sextortion. And out of the 11 chapters in the book, there is one chapter where I introduce the material and I say, this is the most important chapter in the book. And that chapter is sexual consent, sexual assault. And I explain, look, you should know your rights, but you may never, come into a situation where you need to invoke your rights, or you have a friend who attracts your attention to the police and you need to help them. You may not get sexually harassed, and you probably won't harass anybody anyway. But most readers, maybe all, are going to have sexual interaction. And there's no gray area here. You either have sexual consent or you don't. Period. And, going back to when I was a young person, my parents were divorced, and my mom, I remember her talking, she said, look, no means no. If you don't hear no, you can keep going. Now, at the time, that was the standard for sexual consent. Maybe we didn't know better. Maybe some people did, and many of us were just ignorant. But now we certainly know that there are many reasons why someone may not utter the words no, but not want the sexual activity. And the necessary standard for sexual consent is affirmative consent. You ask and wait and get an enthusiastic yes before proceeding. And someone can stop and revoke their consent at any step along the way. So there's no excuses. Everyone, not just young people, but obviously my book is focused on, younger people. You just have to understand what sexual consent is and what it is not. And I go on in the chapter, to talk about, what I see. There's many myths around, sexual assault. For example, like men can't be assaulted. Well, yeah, men can be assaulted. Men are assaulted by other males and by females. If a girl or a woman is dressed a certain way, and she's assaulted, she's at fault. Of course, that's not true, but people believe these things. That's a myth. Victim blaming. That young woman, she was vulnerable, and someone took advantage of her and committed a terrible act against her. So there's so many myths related to sexual consent and sexual assault. So we go through a lot of those. But to me, again, as the author, people will have different opinions as to what they think is the most important thing. And I like that. Everyone should have their own 2 cents about what resonates most with them and their values and their point of view. But from my perspective, the most important part, once we understand affirmative sexual consent, the most important part in that chapter is the section on alcohol and consent. Because, I teach on street safety. You name everything in the book I teach, okay, to families, at schools, to just parents, to all sorts of folks. And I get more questions about alcohol and sexual consent than anything else by far. There is so much confusion and misunderstanding about how alcohol can play a part in consent. So I really, I try to simplify things throughout the book. I want the book to be accessible to any reader, someone from 6th grade to an adult. And so, I try to break things down, explain things in a simple way of why, someone who's drunk, and when I say drunk, I mean high as well. Okay, we'll focus on alcohol, but highly intoxicated from anything. Why they can't give you consent. Even if someone says yes, if they're drunk, they don't have the yes to give. They can't lawfully give you the yes. They can't give you what they don't have by law. And so you can't accept the yes. You can't ask for it and they can't give it to you. So one, someone who's drunk can't give you consent. The best advice I can give to the young people, and everyone, of course, is that if you want to hook up with somebody and they've had any alcohol whatsoever, or you've had any alcohol whatsoever, the best practice is to not have any sexual activity, wait for another day, another sober day. But as I acknowledge in the book, that may not be the most practical advice, because we do know that young people are drinking and hooking up. We also know that there is some amount of alcohol consumption that can go along with a consensual sexual interaction. I think the problem becomes for young people in particular, particularly those who are not lawfully allowed to drink and may not have the experience and the life experience, that, you got to know where that line is. And if you're not sure where that line is, you gotta bring it way back and assume like the line right in front of your face. And so one of the things I advise, like, again, best never to hook up if you've had any alcohol. But having talked to so many young people and in person, that's not enough for them, right? They're like, yeah, but I need to know, and that's not really going to help me. So I came up with a saying, and there's experts throughout the book. So I have people who I've interviewed and whose voices are in the book. Some of them have been working in their fields of expertise longer than I've been alive. And I think you heard me say I'm 49. And there's people working in sexual violence prevention for 60 years who are in this book and whose opinions I greatly value. So I came up with this concept and I ran it by them, and they were very favorable about it. And that is, if you wouldn't drive with them because, for example, you were friends with them and you would take their keys because they're slurring or stumbling or acting out of character, or, all these other objective signs that often come along with someone being highly intoxicated, you can't hook up with them. If you wouldn't drive with them, you can't hook up with them. And when I've been teaching, I started teaching that to young people, and you see kind of like, all right, I can kind of get that. Is it perfect? No, because you may not always see these objective signs. And I try to explain that, but it's a starting point, because, young people, they're very plugged in, at least the young people I come across, they're very plugged into the problems of drunk driving. They Uber, they take each other's keys, they'll get rides from people. They're very plugged into the dangers of driving, while drunk. Well, it's no different. If you wouldn't let somebody drive, don't hook up with them.
I love that there's such clarity that around the drunk driving piece. I imagine a lot of the teenagers around right now are growing up with parents who went through the whole DARE program in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
It just makes me think of the shirts that we used to wear, the DARE program. And so like all these teenagers are byproducts of that level of education that we all got around drug abuse.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But they really are plugged into that. Not all of them, of course, but way more than we were as young people. And when I'm older than you, but before DARE, I think it was MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And, when I was a teenager, you could call a cab and, you could get a cab ride home. But no one called cabs. We didn't have cell phones. You didn't want to wait for a cab, and you just didn't take drunk driving, necessarily as seriously as I think more people do today.
Yeah, that's for sure. So there's a couple of pieces that I thought were really interesting, especially in chapter 4, that I wanted to sort of pull you out on. I'm so grateful that you talked about that affirmative consent thing, because I do think our definitions of consent have changed, the ways that we describe consent. Because I believe my experience of childhood is that we learned the no means no rule. And so to hear it really that it's transitioned and changed to yes means yes. I think it's such an important thing for all of us to understand and to really be having conversations with young men about, because that is where the line needs to be. It does need to be yes means yes. And I think for a long time there was this stigma around asking for permission to kiss someone or to become sexually involved. That wasn't manly, that wasn't suave, that wasn't cool, like that was in some way emasculating. And I actually love that we're getting to this point because of all of the intense craziness that we've had to observe and witness, that we're getting to the point where it actually can be considered really masculine to just make sure you have consent and to make sure that yes means yes.
Absolutely. And, what I say over and over in the book is this, everything in this book is not just for boys. It's not just for girls. It's for anyone, regardless of your gender identity, your sexuality, your sexual identity. It doesn't matter. Everyone should be talking to each other about what they want sexually if they're interested in each other or they think they might be interested in one another. And, it's endearing. It brings confidence. It brings clarity. Who doesn't want that? And one of the things I mentioned in the book is that it's so strange that people are so often more comfortable having sex rather than talking about sex. So you're afraid to ask me for consent, but you just want to have sex. Like, can't we just talk about it a little bit? Can't you just say, hey, I'm interested. Would you like to do this? It's not complicated. And what I hear all the time is, well, it's going to ruin the moment. No, it doesn't. It doesn't ruin the moment at all. If anything, it enhances the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's some of the masculinity or the perception of what masculinity is. Like, I'm a man. I don't have to ask you. I'm going to read your cues. And when it's time, I'm going to kiss you. I don't have to ask to kiss you. But we know cues are misunderstood all the time, particularly when there's alcohol involved. Now, obviously, alcohol doesn't cause sexual assault, but it is a factor in half of all sexual assaults. There is alcohol consumption by the perpetrator, the victim, or both. So there is some connection here, and we're just bad at judging people's cues.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that it's best to just take the guessing game out of it. And I like that sort of concept that if you're not ready to talk about it and say what you want to do and ask for permission about it, you might not actually be really ready to be engaging in those behaviors. If you're not at the maturity level to be able to have a conversation, maybe it's time to hold back and check in. Why do I feel so uncomfortable having that conversation?
But exactly. But that goes back to, why I'm here with you and why you started this podcast and so many other things you do. Is that it's this masculinity, this concept of masculinity, right? I don't see guys ask in the movies. The cool guy in the movie doesn't, or the TV show, he doesn't ask. He just does. And the girls respond. The women all love him. And, I get it. I grew up with that and I didn't have anything to offset that. Okay. There were no podcasts like you're doing. There was no book like mine. At least I don't think there was a book like mine. But, and these are dangerous messages that I just saw over and over. And at least today, these young people, they're still seeing these things, but at least there is a counter narrative at times that I hope they hear and see.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think a byproduct that's come out of like the Me Too generation and women coming forward and people coming forward talking about their sexual assault experiences and unwanted sexual advances from men mostly in these situations, is this fear that I've heard people discussing, parents talking about their teenage boys about like, well, what if a girl makes up a story about her being raped by my son? She could ruin him forever. We saw it play out through the whole Kavanaugh trial or the Kavanaugh hearings for the Supreme Court. We saw this whole like, what if a woman or someone makes up a story about a boy about rape? There's a part of the book you talk about that sort of that myth around false rape accusations. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. That was kind of a later addition to the book. I probably added that, in one of my later drafts because I kept getting these questions when I did the in-person events around, the sexual consent topic, primarily from mothers of sons. Okay, from the boys themselves, but really a lot from moms of sons about these false rape accusations. And look, I have 3 sons. I worry about everything related to my sons. Is there a part of me that worries about a false rape accusation? I guess as much as I worry about anything else, but do I lose sleep over it? Of course not, because it is a myth. False rape accusations happen. No doubt. They certainly happen. The myth is that they happen frequently because they don't happen frequently. Rape is the most underreported crime in our society. So there's probably never going to be an allegation because for many, many reasons, victims are afraid to come forward. Okay, for countless reasons. So there's probably never going to be an allegation. And when there is an allegation, it's very, very rare where a young man or a young woman, but typically it's going to be a man accused, is going to go to prison or is going to be prosecuted or is even going to be arrested. That's a whole other situation going on there. Then when they are false rape accusations, when they are deemed false, those false reportings are around 2 to 5%, which is the same false reporting of other crimes. So really, it's a myth. So, that's what I try to convey. Look, it could happen just like any of these other ills might befall us, but it is very, very unlikely. And the way, and I've told my own boys, in a roundabout way, that if you're afraid, and I say it to the people I teach, if you're afraid of a false rape accusation, first let me give you the facts, right? Why it's not probably going to happen. And 2, if you're still fearful of it, I can give you a 2-step plan so that you are almost guaranteed, almost 100% guaranteed to never get a false rape accusation. And the 2 steps are 1, we've covered them. 1, don't hook up with anybody who's had any alcohol consumption or if you've had any alcohol consumption. And again, I'm talking about any intoxicating substances, but alcohol is the biggie. And 2, always practice affirmative sexual consent. If you don't do those 2 things, which you should be doing anyway, right? We should all be doing those things. You're not going to get a false rape accusation. And I do also want to just segue a little bit to another place in the chapter where I talk about the fact that I was sexually assaulted by a female, and I don't have trauma around it. It was upsetting at the time, and when I think about it, it's upsetting. But look, I don't want to compare myself to other victim survivors of sexual assault because not to discount it, but it didn't take my life off the rails. Okay, but speaking about late additions to the book, I didn't include in the sexual assault chapter my own experience with sexual assault, probably until we were like close to being done with the book. And I only added it because I was interviewing someone for that chapter. And I was wrapping up my interview about sexual assault and consent and so on. And I always entered my interviews with the same question with every expert. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share with me? And he said, yeah, there is. And he said, look, I want to be very clear that men are assaulted too. Boys are assaulted too. And sometimes by females, sometimes by males. But yet there's this feeling amongst males and men that if you were sexually assaulted, you're weak. Why did you put up a fight? How could you not want the sexual activity if it was from a woman, right? How do you not want sex? Are you a real man? And so I was assaulted by a woman, and I mentioned it a couple times to friends, and they laughed. Boom. I couldn't even finish like my second sentence, and they thought it was hysterical. And I wasn't sitting there crying about it, and maybe I should have been. I don't know, right? But I was just sharing something I had gone through. I wasn't even leaning on them. It was just conversation, like, well, this happened to me, and it was upsetting, and it made me shut up. It made me not share it with anybody. And when the expert said that to me, I was like, man, He's absolutely right. Why aren't I sharing? I've shared my experiences throughout this book. I've bared my soul throughout this book. Why aren't I going to share that too? So I ended up sharing that. I think, people appreciate, how honest I've been and how candid I've been. And also that, I'm not less of a man, because a female sexually assaulted me. At least I don't think I am. And anyone who does, they're a fool as far as I'm concerned.
I'm so glad you brought that topic up and you're sharing this, because I think that in some ways is modeling a new version of strength as a man, strength in your vulnerability, not the strength that nothing ever happens to you negative and you've never been coerced or put in a situation where you were a victim of something. That is this misleading thing that we all as men always need to be in the dominant position. And yet life happens. Life is hard. Life happens to all of us. And so I appreciate you sort of modeling that version of strength that is in your vulnerability, that is owning your experiences so that others can see themselves in that and can feel safer being who they are. I'm also glad you brought it up, because I pulled this quote out from the book that really kind of encapsulates this, that I was hoping to hear more from you around. And it's on page 103 of the book, and it says, "Male victim survivors of sexual assault can have the same feelings and reactions as female victim survivors, but often face increased pressure and challenges because of social norms and what it means to be masculine." It's so interesting that not only is the experience traumatic, but then there's this whole social component of being less of a man attached to it, no matter what the gender is of the perpetrator on the male victim survivor.
Yeah, and it's brutal. And, I don't recall the stats off the top of my head, but I think, some of the stats are, 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted at some point in their lives, and 1 in 33 men are sexually assaulted at any point or at one point in their lives. But and this is from the Rape and Incest Network, RAINN, RAINN.org, RAINN.org. But there's a little asterisk, or there's a little explanation when you see the 1 in 33, and it always goes along the lines of something like, well, we think the number's much higher with men, but there's a greater stigma that men don't want to report sexual assault because, again, how could I let another man sexually assault me? I guess I'm not strong. I guess I'm not tough. I guess I'm a wimp. How could I let a woman sexually assault me? And how could I even think it's sexual assault if a woman wants to have sex with me? I'm supposed to want that sex, right? Isn't that what being a man's about? Never turning down sex. You want as much sex with every woman that you can get. Well, obviously that's not the case. These are, lies we tell society. These are lies we tell ourselves. These are the myths. These are the false narratives. And, I try to do what I can to bring the information to light that, you're not weaker. These things, as you said, life happens. Anything can happen to anyone. But when it comes to raising my sons, I want them to really understand that, one, I hope when they do have sexual activity, it's with someone they care about. But there's nothing wrong with not wanting sex. And any of their friends who, think they're crazy for not wanting to go out with somebody, they're foolish. They don't know what they're talking about. And same thing, when I talk to my sons, about, they're tired of me saying these things, but, I don't ever want to, hear a situation where they or their friends are talking about how hot girls are. Oh man, she's got this and she's got that and what I would do to her. That is like one of those things that gets really under my skin because, I think I mentioned to you, women are under temperature. We don't describe women as hot or not. They're human beings. And I say, look, if you think someone's attractive, sure, you can say, I think she's really pretty, or I think she's really nice, or she's great. But to start talking in crude terms, I think does them and anyone they're associating with a huge disservice. I think it does men and young men a huge disservice. And they know better. And I told them there will be times, I guarantee you, that you will be with some guys and they're going to start talking crudely about women. Or they're going to comments that are, slut shaming or demeaning. And I hope you're brave enough to say something. I hope you're the one brave enough to say, hey man, that's not funny. Let's not talk that way. So we'll see what happens, but at least I'm trying to educate them so that hopefully they can get out in front of me.
I so appreciate that you're talking about this. It's interesting as I reflect on my own experiences not being a person in heterosexual sexual relationships. I also see that playing out in gay male communities too, where the language about each other is about objectification. It's not, we're so underdeveloped as boys and men to express caring emotions, what we like about people, to be able to share caring emotions in general. We know how to objectify. We know how to treat something as separate and something that I can take and conquer. It makes me think of a relationship I was in a few years ago that I went on this trip with a partner of mine at the time, and him and his friends were just talking about all of their sexual conquest that they had over 20 years ago. And I'm like, you're in your 40s now. Like, we're still telling those stories as if they mean something about your value as a person. Like, we've moved on. We've grown up. We're not in our 20s anymore. Like, let's have a real adult conversation, connect with each other, not figure out our social status by something that happened 20 years ago that is kind of disgusting to hear you talk about anyways.
Right. Well, and it's going to look. It's going to happen with my son, with every all these young people. It happens as adults, as you're saying. But if we can, like I said, if we just get a little bit out in front of it. I wish I had known, because look, I came into my own late. I had my struggles, and again, I was able to turn myself around. But I just wish I had someone who could give me some of this information at a younger age. I would have benefited a heck of a lot from it. My dad wasn't involved in my life. And so, maybe I try to overcompensate because, I am trying to front this information for my sons, and half the time, or actually 3/4 of the time, it doesn't seem like they're even listening to me. But I want to give them an advantage. I want them to be, to be more advanced emotionally, socially, more confident with who they are, and not having to conform with a drinking culture, an objectification culture. Because, theoretically, they're going to go off to college and they will be surrounded by some people who are like that. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I just want my sons to have balance and to see what's happening and be aware of what's happening. And I hope they're brave enough to say something. But if they're not, okay, just don't contribute to it. Okay. If you're not feeling like you can say something, then fine. But do not be a part of it. You're better than them. And so that's what I strive for and what I hope, they can accomplish.
I'm so glad that you do try to overcorrect for these situations, because I think that sort of concept of healthy male mentors and balanced male mentors that have a different value system than some of these outdated power over dynamic kind of traditional masculine ideals. There's such a lack of that. And so we need people like you overdoing it to sort of make up for the negative models that we're getting to see constantly. I mean, look at where we're at as a country with our president, the things that are being able to be said about women and about people. It's mind-blowing to me.
And this isn't, I'm not going to get, at least I don't think it's political, but, 4+ years ago when, there were numerous allegations against Donald Trump, about, sexual assault. I think 14, 15 women came forward. I was astonished that wasn't a disqualifier, for many people. And I would, no matter if Republican or Democrat, if you were the Democratic nominee, I'd say the exact same thing. These women aren't lying. And okay, maybe a couple of them are. I don't think any of them are, but 16 or 15 women all saying they were sexually assaulted. And what's going on in our country where that's not an instant disqualifier for any office, for any position, regardless of whether it's in politics or not. I just find it so troubling. And, in the same vein, it's the same thing with like sexual harassment. For some reason, way over my pay grade, there's so many men, and I'm sure there's women too. So I have more of these conversations with men or with my circle of friends, so it's easier for me to kind of pinpoint those conversations. So I'm sure there's many women who feel the same way. But I have many conversations with men and my friends, and sometimes it scares me what I hear them say, how so many of these, sexual harassment claims are just made up, or they're just gripes. There's someone who didn't get a promotion. Do you think someone wants to bring this about, upon themselves? Do you think, what do they have to gain from this? And so, I feel for them because, again, I think it's just the narrative we've heard our whole lives as men. Again, I just think we're evolving slowly and maybe too slowly, but essentially that's why I wrote this book, and not just on the sexuality front and not just for boys and men. It's for all of us to make progress as human beings, for as parents and caregivers for young people, to help them be successful. It is no joke coming of age today. And I say in the book that, I got do-overs. I messed up. I did so many things I shouldn't have done. I mean, I was a good kid, but I did a lot of things I shouldn't have done, but I got do-overs. And do-overs are much harder to come by today. And a big part of that has to do with the digital world in which, young people are growing up in, and the cameras and, social media and, putting everything in writing digitally. So it's always going to be there. But I want young people to know, they have every opportunity in the world. There's so much, that's wonderful about the world today that they're growing up in. But there's a level of accountability and forethought for teenagers today that I don't think is fair. They shouldn't have to worry about all these consequences of their digital footprint and everything else when they're 13 or 12. But that's the world we're in. And so, the do-overs are a lot harder to come by today than I was.
That's so true. It's such a unique element that teenagers have to deal with these days that your generation didn't have to. I was the first generation that had social media. We were the first that got Facebook. I mean, there was MySpace before us, but like Facebook came out while I was in college, and it was like the kickoff to real social media. And I can think back on like, I'm glad I have experience with it, but I also am like, there's a lot of things that about me as a 20-year-old, as me as an 18-year-old, that I don't want to be held accountable for at this point.
Yeah.
And that's like, that what I mean for myself is like just things that I said, or things that were flippant, or things that were attention seeking, or whatever of that kind of thing. I'm not talking about like overtly racism or sexism or
of course.
Yeah. But it is interesting to be growing up in a world where it's actually like there's a whole groupings of people that are spending all their time searching people's digital footprint and looking for the flaws in them, putting them out in front of people and canceling them. That's a lot of pressure. I thought about that while I was putting this podcast out, which was, I'm going to put myself out there and I could get canceled. I could do this imperfectly. I could be the gay guy that's trying to talk about masculinity. I could just run right into my childhood wounds of not being man enough real quick and be canceled on the internet. Yeah. And that's a lot to deal with. And it's hard for me to imagine what teenagers experience. Luckily, their sort of prefrontal cortex isn't fully online, so they're not thinking about those consequences in the now. But that's also the downside is they're much more in the moment and reactionary, and not thinking about how their impact necessarily on others and what that will do long term. So you're so right. That's such a unique element that we need to be talking about with teenagers. Is their digital footprint and safety online.
Oh, for sure. And the digital footprint is a huge thing. And, one of my sons, he didn't, at a younger age, he wanted to create a YouTube Lego channel because he loved Legos. And I said, Bud, you're good at Legos, but no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, you're going to put this channel together, and some of the people are just going to be brutal. Some of them are just going to troll you. Some of them are just going to try to knock you down. And I go, and it's out there. And not only is it part of your digital footprint, but it can harm you emotionally. It may be very hurtful, even though what they're saying isn't true. That you don't know these people, and who cares what they have to say. And he thought about it. He goes, "Yeah, Dad, I don't want to deal with that." And I go, "Well, maybe you'll do it when you're older, but you're a little young now for that." I think he was 13 or 14. I go, "Maybe you'll do it later, but now it's a bit young for that, because, people are going to come for you. And even when it's not justified, it's just the world in which we live." And, turning to the digital footprint thing, I get hired most out of all my topics. I get hired most to teach on digital safety and digital footprint. And I get hired starting in fifth grade to go into schools, or for parents and their families to talk about digital footprint, because I think as parents, we're starting to realize more and more how impactful a digital footprint can be, for good or bad. And at such a young age, from the first time they're clicking online, liking, sharing, whatever they're doing online, and it's getting younger and younger. It's comprised, within their digital footprint. And, when I hire, I supervise 20 people for the LA City Attorney's Office. And when I got hired 20 years ago, it was competitive, but nowhere near what it is now. To get a job in my office, it's very, very competitive. And I'll always narrow down, my candidates, my top candidates, like 2 or 3. And then I do a deep dive into their digital footprint. And if I'm looking for ways to disqualify somebody. Like, I can't decide between these 2 people. Let's say they're both so great, but I have one position. I gotta find something to distinguish them. And sometimes I find something troubling in their digital footprint, and that's what gives the other person the slight edge. And when I teach on digital safety and citizenship and so on and so forth, but when I'm focusing on the footprint, I'm, explaining to the young people, look, your reputation may not mean a lot to you now, but it's going to. And the first place people are going to, go to learn about you is Google. And Google is essentially your digital reputation, more or less. And it's incredibly important to recognize as a young person that there are 2 groups of people that you have to be very mindful of, who are decision makers, who are going to be checking you out online. Those, for many people, are going to go to college. Those are going to be college admissions administrators, and that's going to be prospective employers. They are going to be checking you out online. What are they going to find? And then I try to turn this into a positive, as I do in the book, that, since employers are going to be checking you out online sooner or later, college administrators, for some of the young people who go off to college, they're going to be checking you out. It's so important to populate your digital footprint with things that are the best reflection of you. An award you receive, volunteer work you do, something you're passionate about that you're pursuing. And it's not phony stuff. You're not creating, it's not fiction. You're not creating this solely to put in your digital footprint. You're doing these things already. You're simply highlighting the good things you're doing, and put that out into your digital footprint, so that when that college administrator is checking you out, hey, they see you volunteered, at the pet store to clean, or adopt a pet, shelter. They saw that you were doing something you love in marine biology, whatever it is. There are ways we can populate our digital footprint to really reflect the best versions of who we are.
I laugh a little as I was reading that section of the book on sort of your digital footprint. You walk through an exercise of how to check out your digital footprint, what things to Google, what combinations of things to Google. And I laughed because I was like, oh, I better do this. I started doing it while reading the book, was like making sure what was out there about me.
Yeah, right. And look, for some young people, they're going to do that exercise, and I'm glad you brought that up. I list about 18 different ways you should be searching your name and exactly how to do it. And if a young person, before they apply for a job, before they apply to college, if they do go through that exercise and they find something that isn't the best reflection of who they are, there are ways to get around it. There are ways to kind of, bury that down in Google searches and to populate your digital footprint with good things. In other words, it's not the end of the world. There's so much pressure on young people today and everyone in society, right? It's a crazy world we live in. But I also want to make very clear to young people that it's okay to make a mistake. There's no mistake that you can make in which, there's no recovery. That you can always do better. We can always find a way to improve things. And that goes the same with your digital footprint. If there's something bad in your digital footprint, well, let's populate some good things in there so that instead of appearing on page 1 of the Google results, it's on page 3. Because most people don't go past page 1 of the Google results. I think like 90% of people don't go past that first page. So, it's never too late. Hope is not always lost. You can always do better. And I'm living proof of that because I made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, you had mistakes from your life and you still have a really good job as a prosecutor, supervising people, writing a book. Like, there is redemption after mistakes. And it's just about...
Yeah. And I'm still making mistakes. I'm still, I have trauma in my life like most people do. And I'm just very fortunate that I married my wife, Lisa, who, is supportive and when I don't want to talk, because that's another thing. I never talked about my feelings ever. I didn't talk about my feelings.
You were taught not to talk about your feelings, probably.
Right. Right. Like, who am I going to talk to? So what I did growing up, I just kept it all inside. And when I try to do that with my wife, it's a no-go. She's going to say, that doesn't work with me. You grew up your whole life not sharing your feelings. We're going to talk about these things. And it's been good for me because she knows my patterns. She knows how I grew up. She knows how I buried my emotions, and it's not healthy for me. And it's caused real problems for me. And so, I'm still evolving. I'm still trying to improve. And certainly I'd like to think I've come a long way. But, the big push with my book is to, try to let these young people, not necessarily have to stumble the way that I may have stumbled, or you may have stumbled, or many of us have stumbled. And, unfortunately, schools today most schools are not going to teach the concepts in this book. And I'm not blaming schools. They're underfunded. They got more standardized tests than they can possibly handle. But geez, shouldn't the topics in this book be a high school class? Aren't these just as important as another math class, another history class? And maybe we'll get there one day, but we're not yet. And we want the young people in our lives to grow up safely. And I always say, we can't expect young people to make informed decisions if they don't have the information. And really, that's what I'm trying to do. Get the information to these young people. They're going to decide what they decide. But we can't control that. But at least we can share some information with them so we can hope that they make better decisions.
Amen to that. One last thing that I wanted to sort of call out about the book that I just wanted to sort of express some gratitude to you for how you wrote this book is that you chose a very inclusive writing style, and the images that go along in the book are very inclusive too. They represent not just white, cisgender, male, female relationships, heterosexual relationships. There are non-white folks in the images. There are non-heterosexual relationships. It's gender inclusive language that values all beings. And so I really wanted to thank you for making sure to make that a point in this, that not only are you accepting, but you're being inclusive with your language, and more types of people can see themselves because you speak directly to them instead of just talking to white boys and girls and leaving out the rest of us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that because that was a big thing for me. I wanted this book to be inclusive. I wanted anyone who picked up this book to feel like it could apply to them, that it resonated with who they are. And we come in so many different shapes and sizes. We're all alike. We all want the same things in life. And so that was a huge thing for me to write. And it was hard. Because, so many of these issues, can skew one way. For example, sexual assault, going back to that. Well, more males commit sexual assault than females. But, if I just say it like that, well, then it undermines, guys like me who were sexually attracted by a female. So, anything can happen to anyone. We all want the same things. We want love. We want to be accepted. And, no, I appreciate that because that was a big part of my objective.
Well, it's definitely well accomplished. I was definitely very aware throughout the book of how you were really speaking to a diverse population of people through your writing. So thank you for doing that. I think it's so important in this time. So I like to end my interviews with sort of a whopper of a question. It's sometimes challenging to land it in this place, but if you could give men, or teen boys in this case, one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's a great question. To me, the first thing that comes to mind is if they're hurting, if they're feeling down, if something's really bothering them, to share it with somebody they trust. And if when I look back on my own life, and I just was talking about it, I still follow that pattern of clamming up and not wanting to share my emotions. And sometimes my wife's got to beat it out of me. I wish as a young man, I had known that it's okay to share my feelings, particularly when I'm upset, particularly when I'm hurting. I wish I had known that, to find somebody. I didn't feel like I could talk to my parents, as a young person for a lot of reasons. And I wish I had turned to somebody else, a trusted adult. I wish I had, talked to a family friend, a school counselor, a coach, a rabbi, priest, whoever it would have been. I wish I would have found that person, and talked to them, because all the things I was, going through and all the self-suffering, and I don't think it would have just gone away, but I'm very confident it would have gotten better. I'm very confident I would have continued into my downward spiral if I'd just gotten some things off my chest. In other words, I suffered in silence. And so, that's probably my biggest message to young people in particular is, and of course for boys and girls, but particularly, for the boys out there that, they're trying to, conform to what they may think masculinity is supposed to be. And really, there's nothing wrong with sharing what you're going through. Find someone you trust, and you will be better for it. I can guarantee it.
I think the world would be such a drastically different place just with that one little piece if boys and men started learning to share about their feelings and to have some sort of dialogue around them. Yeah. So I so appreciate that. So the book is What They Don't Teach Teens, Life Safety Skills for Teens and Adults Who Care for Them. You're Jonathan Cristall. How do people find out more information about you, this book, and the work you're doing in the world?
Well, thank you. So What They Don't Teach Teens is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. My website is whattheydontteachteens.com. You can reach out to me there. I'm always happy to hear from people, particularly, lesson they learned from the book, something, a way it helped them. So whattheydontteachteens.com, and of course the book's available through any bookstore.
Well, I definitely recommend the listeners checking out this book. I think it can be such an important source of information, of knowledge, of this life skills that we're not being taught as teenagers in school. We're being taught a curriculum of things that we think we will need, and yet there are some real life skills that are not being taught that need to be updated to the 21st century, especially this concept of like digital footprint, and there's so many complexities to life now. And so I really think this book has a lot of value, and I really encourage the listeners to check it out. If anyone wants to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at traver03. I'm also on Patreon. If you want to support the movement that is The New Masculine, you can go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Again, that's patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining me and for helping us open the aperture a bit and start to explore not only what is our role within masculinity as men, but what are we teaching young boys? How are we helping grow the youth into the next generation of men that really know how to embody the values of the new masculine? So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Travis, for what you're doing.